She woke up to the soft light of the morning sun streaming through her bedroom window. The city was just beginning to stir, with distant sounds of traffic and early birds filling the air. She stretched, taking a deep breath, feeling the calmness that mornings often brought her. Today was going to be like any other day, or so she thought. She moved through her apartment with precision, preparing herself for the day ahead. Everything had its place. Her clothes neatly folded, her documents organized, and her schedule carefully planned. To anyone who knew her casually, she seemed like an ordinary woman with a busy professional life. She made herself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth and aroma, feeling the quiet moments of peace before stepping into the demanding world outside. The neighbors greeted her warmly as she stepped outside. Everyone in her small community knew her as friendly and polite, someone who always had time to exchange a few words. She smiled and waved, her calm presence giving an air of reassurance to those around her. What no one in her neighborhood could have guessed was her true role. Her influence stretched far beyond the familiar streets of her city. She was the director of Homeland Security, a position that required intelligence, strategy, and a deep understanding of both threats and the systems designed to prevent them. But at home in her community, she was just another neighbor, someone who could be trusted and admired for her humility. Meanwhile, a few miles away, the local police department was buzzing with a different kind of energy, not the everyday hum of routine work, but a sense of opportunity, of planning something that should never have been considered. Some officers had grown bold over time, assuming that certain members of the public could be manipulated or framed without consequence. They saw the world in a way that made them think rules applied to others but not to themselves. Today their attention had turned to her, though they had no idea who she really was. They saw someone who appeared to be an ordinary woman, someone who could be trapped, someone they thought they could control. She stepped into her car, her movements deliberate, her mind already running through her agenda for the day. There was a meeting scheduled at headquarters, a briefing that required her attention to detail and her strategic thinking. She had learned long ago to expect the unexpected, and her instincts were sharp. She felt a subtle unease as she drove, not enough to alarm her, but enough to make her aware that something was different about this morning. The street seemed quieter than usual, and the glance in her rearview mirror hinted at a shadow she could not immediately place. She had faced threats before, but today felt oddly personal, though she could not yet define why. At the police department, the officers were going over their plan once again, convinced they had chosen the right target. They had a theory, a belief that she had somehow been involved in a minor incident nearby, and they were determined to make it seem as though she had been part of something illegal. Their confidence was built on assumptions that they would soon discover were dangerously flawed. They did not know her history, her capabilities, or the sharp mind that had led her to the highest ranks of government security. To them, she was just a woman they thought they could intimidate, frame, and control. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth, and that would be their first mistake. As she moved through the city streets, she noticed small things that others might overlook. A car parked too long near her usual route, a shadow that moved in sync with hers, and the feeling of being watched. Her experience had taught her to pay attention to these details, to trust her instincts, and to act decisively when something felt off. She had trained her mind to observe without panic, to prepare without drawing attention, and to react with precision if needed. Her life had been built on discipline, and today, that discipline would become essential. She arrived at the location where she had a brief stop before heading to work, a small cafe she often visited for a quick breakfast. She greeted the barista, exchanging a few words as if this were just another normal morning. Yet her mind was alert, analyzing the environment, noting every detail, the positions of people in the room, the faces that seemed slightly out of place, the movements that didn't match the flow of the cafe. She ordered her coffee and a small pastry, keeping her calm and friendly exterior while quietly scanning her surroundings. Every instinct told her that this day would not unfold as smoothly as most mornings had. Back at the police department, tension began to rise among the officers. They were reviewing the evidence they had fabricated, believing that their plan would be foolproof. They discussed how they would approach her, how they would confront her in a way that seemed professional yet forceful. They assumed she would be caught off guard, intimidated, and compliant. Little did they know that the woman they were targeting was not only aware, but several steps ahead. They had prepared for someone ordinary, someone unprepared, someone without access to power or influence. Their plan was built on a false understanding of her life, her authority, and her ability to protect herself. As she finished her coffee, she noticed a car parked outside the cafe that did not belong there. It was subtle, but her instincts picked it up immediately. She observed quietly, noting the make of the car, the movements of the occupants inside, and the fact that they seemed unusually interested in her. Her training told her that she needed to stay calm, maintain her composure, and gather information without drawing attention. She paid the bill, left a tip, and walked back to her car, her mind running through possibilities, evaluating risk, and considering her next steps. She did not panic, but she knew something was brewing. The officers, confident in their scheme, decided to move forward. They had already spoken among themselves about the plan to approach her, intending to catch her off guard and make her look guilty of something she had not done. They did not consider that she had spent years observing human behavior, understanding strategy, and preparing for situations that required immediate and intelligent responses. They were walking into a situation where their assumptions and arrogance would collide with her experience and authority. Each step they took toward their goal increased the risk that they would encounter someone far more formidable than they had anticipated. She returned to her car and drove carefully toward her main office. Along the way, she noticed more signs that something was amiss, subtle hints that could have been dismissed by anyone else. A pedestrian lingering near an alley, a delivery truck parked in an unusual spot, a pattern of movement that seemed coordinated. Her mind cataloged every detail, not just for her safety but to understand the broader picture. She had learned over the years that awareness was the first step in preventing harm, that observation without fear was a critical tool, and that knowledge could turn the tables in situations where others sought to create chaos. As she approached her office building, she parked in her usual spot, noting the lack of the usual security presence in the area. It was a minor detail, but for her, every detail mattered. She stepped out of her car, feeling the cool breeze on her face, and walked with the same calm, confident pace she had mastered over the years. To any passerby, she looked composed and professional, someone focused on her day ahead. But beneath that exterior, her mind was alert, analyzing, planning, and preparing for the unexpected. She knew that today would test her in ways that were both subtle and potentially dangerous. Inside her office, she greeted her staff with her usual warmth and professionalism. Meetings, briefings, and reports filled her morning, but her attention never wavered from the subtle signs she had noticed earlier. She began to connect dots, forming a picture of what might be happening outside her walls. Her staff noticed nothing unusual, and that was exactly as she intended. She needed to maintain normalcy to prevent anyone from sensing that she had picked up on a potential threat. Her experience in security had taught her that composure was a weapon, that calmness could disarm tension, and that preparation was always preferable to reaction. By mid-morning, she had pieced together enough to understand that someone had set their sights on her. She remained outwardly calm, but inside her mind was running through strategies, scenarios, and outcomes. She documented everything discreetly, using her knowledge of systems, surveillance, and investigative procedures. Every movement, every detail, every potential risk was catalogued. She was not intimidated. She was focused. She had built a career on facing challenges far greater than anything a local police department could present. And she knew that intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking would see her through. Her day continued, a balance of normal work and quiet observation. Emails, meetings, and phone calls kept her busy, but she never lost sight of the subtle threats surrounding her. Every encounter, every glance, every movement was analyzed for hidden meaning. Her calm demeanor was a shield, her intelligence a weapon, and her preparation a fortress. She understood the stakes, the potential consequences, and the need to act decisively when the moment arrived. And as she moved through the day, she remained vigilant, aware that the ordinary morning she had started with was far from ordinary, and that the challenge ahead would require every ounce of her skill, composure, and courage. The morning had passed quietly, but the subtle signs of danger that she had noticed earlier began to grow more pronounced. As she moved through her office, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to manipulate events outside her awareness. The local police officers, confident in their plan, had begun to put their scheme into motion. They had gathered what they thought was enough evidence to frame her, their arrogance blinding them to the reality that they were dealing with someone far more capable than they imagined. They assumed she would be intimidated by their authority, that she would falter when confronted. They were completely wrong. She noticed more irregularities as the day unfolded. Phone calls that seemed ordinary on the surface contained subtle interruptions and delays. Emails arrived slightly out of sequence. A few colleagues mentioned seeing unusual vehicles near the building, almost as if someone were trying to keep her movements under observation. She remained outwardly calm, chatting with staff, attending briefings, and reviewing reports. But beneath her composed exterior, her mind was fully alert. Every detail was recorded, every anomaly analyzed, and every potential risk assessed. She understood that acting too early could reveal her awareness, so she maintained the facade of routine while preparing to respond at the perfect moment. The officers, meanwhile, were moving with a dangerous overconfidence. They believed their plan to be flawless. They had coordinated their steps to catch her off guard, assuming she had no knowledge of what they were planning. They believed they were the clever ones, that they could manipulate evidence, witnesses, and circumstance to make it appear that she had been involved in something illegal. They did not consider that her experience in intelligence and security had prepared her for far more complex schemes. They underestimated her ability to observe, to deduce, and to turn the situation against them. She received an unexpected delivery at her office. It was a simple package, but her instincts immediately told her to check it carefully. Every object, every envelope, every item that entered her domain was scrutinized. She opened it with caution, noting that nothing inside was harmful, but the timing of the delivery felt deliberate. It was a subtle message, a way of testing her awareness, perhaps to see if she would react. She remained composed, placing the package aside and continuing her work, observing who delivered it and how. Her ability to remain calm under pressure had been honed over decades, and she understood that outward panic would only encourage those trying to manipulate her. In another part of the city, the officers were discussing their next move. They spoke in confident tones, believing that their plan was about to succeed. They were unaware that she had already begun countermeasures, documenting every detail of their movements and communications. She knew that patience was key. Acting too soon could give them a chance to adjust, but waiting allowed her to gather enough evidence to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. She was not just protecting herself. She was preparing to hold them accountable for every action they had taken. The day moved forward, and she continued her schedule with impeccable focus. Meetings with colleagues, strategy sessions, and briefings filled her hours. But all the while she kept a mental map of the subtle threats around her. A parking lot across the street seemed unusually busy, with vehicles that appeared to be monitoring the building. People in the lobby occasionally glanced at her with curiosity that didn't match the casual environment. To a casual observer, everything seemed normal, but she understood that observation and awareness were crucial. She moved with confidence, taking note of patterns, discrepancies, and anything that could indicate a broader plan. During lunch, she stepped outside briefly, taking a walk to clear her mind. Even this small, everyday activity was observed with her trained attention. She noticed a man leaning against a lamppost a few blocks away, shifting slightly whenever she looked in his direction. A car drove past slowly, turning the corner in a way that drew her attention. She did not react outwardly. She smiled at a passerby, greeting them as though everything were routine. But in her mind she was cataloging, analyzing, and preparing. She knew that awareness alone could prevent disaster, and that calmness was a tool as powerful as any legal authority she held. The officers were growing impatient. Their plan, which they had believed would unfold quickly, was being disrupted by subtle resistance they could not understand. Nothing overt had happened yet, but small inconsistencies in their observations suggested that their target was not as unprepared as they had assumed. They whispered among themselves, trying to figure out why their carefully constructed plan seemed off. What they did not know was that she had already gathered information about their movements, communications, and intentions. Each attempt to corner her was being documented and analyzed, turning their own actions into evidence against them. Back in her office, she quietly accessed internal resources available to her as director. She was not acting as an enforcer at this point, but as a careful observer. She traced phone patterns, checked surveillance footage, and verified movements in the area. Every subtle act of attention added to a growing collection of data that would become vital if her suspicions were confirmed. She remained outwardly calm, smiling as she interacted with staff, discussing strategy and handling routine decisions. Her composure made it impossible for anyone to suspect that she was aware of the brewing plot. A small disturbance occurred near the entrance of her building. Two officers who were part of the framing attempt appeared to be questioning a visitor, asking questions that seemed routine but were carefully designed to probe her activities. She observed quietly, noting everything. Their body language, tone, and choice of words revealed more than they intended. She realized that they had not expected her to notice these subtleties. Her awareness was already a step ahead, turning their confidence into uncertainty. She continued her routine, pretending not to notice while her mind cataloged every interaction. As the afternoon progressed, she received a message from a trusted colleague in another department. The message was subtle but clear, hinting that unusual activity had been observed near her location. She understood that she was not alone and that her network of support could be leveraged if necessary. The officers were still operating under the assumption that they were in control. They believed that their manipulation would succeed without interference, but they were unaware of the quiet network of awareness, intelligence, and authority that surrounded her. Every move they made was being quietly noted, turned into evidence, and prepared for the moment when accountability would be enforced. By late afternoon, she had gathered a comprehensive understanding of what was happening. The officer's plan to frame her was evident in every detail: the suspicious vehicles, the fabricated evidence, the casual questions to witnesses, and the deliberate positioning of personnel. She did not react with anger. Instead, she carefully prepared her next steps. She knew that exposing their plan too early could allow them to adjust, but patience and preparation would ensure that when the truth was revealed, it would be undeniable. Her calm demeanor and strategic thinking were her greatest tools, and she relied on them fully. Throughout the day, she maintained normalcy in every interaction. Staff meetings, briefings, and even casual conversations were handled with warmth and professionalism. But beneath the surface, her mind was fully engaged, turning every observation into insight, every anomaly into understanding, and every subtle threat into actionable intelligence. She had spent years developing the ability to remain calm under pressure, to analyze situations objectively, and to act decisively when required. Today, all of that experience was being applied in real time, as she navigated a dangerous situation with precision and grace. The officers, growing increasingly anxious, decided to escalate their approach. They believed that confronting her more directly would force her to make a mistake. What they did not understand was that she had already anticipated multiple scenarios and had prepared responses for each. Their attempt at intimidation was met with calm observation, and their overconfidence would soon become their undoing. She remained composed, aware of every step they took, cataloging every move, and quietly preparing the evidence that would ensure their accountability. As the day drew to a close, she reflected on the delicate balance she had maintained. She had moved through her office, her community, and her professional network with composure, all while quietly observing a growing threat. The officer's plan, built on arrogance and misunderstanding, had been meticulously documented without their knowledge. She had not only preserved her own safety, but had prepared a path to hold those responsible accountable. Her calm demeanor, intelligence, and strategic foresight had allowed her to navigate a situation that could have been dangerous for anyone less prepared. Even as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, she remained alert. She understood that the next phase would require action, but she was ready. Her preparation had created an advantage that could not be ignored, and the arrogance of those attempting to frame her was about to collide with the reality of her authority. She left her office with the same calm, confident stride, fully aware that the evening arrived quietly, but the tension in the air had grown heavier. She returned to her office to finish up the last of her reports, moving with calm efficiency. Her mind, however, was anything but idle. Every detail of the day replayed in her memory. The suspicious vehicles, the unusual questions, the subtle movements of people around her. She knew that the local officers believed they had the upper hand, but in reality, she had already gathered enough information to understand their plan. Her approach was methodical. She did not panic. She did not react impulsively. Instead, she quietly prepared for what would come next. Her office was a sanctuary of order. Every file, document, and electronic record was in its rightful place, yet, beneath the surface, she was conducting an investigation of her own. She traced patterns of movement outside her building, analyzed the behavior of individuals who had interacted with her, and documented every inconsistency. The officers had assumed that she would be unaware of their actions, but her experience told her otherwise. She understood human behavior, she understood strategy, and she understood power. They had underestimated her, and that underestimation would soon become a critical mistake. Her phone buzzed quietly with a message from a trusted colleague. The note was simple, almost mundane on the surface, but it confirmed what she already suspected. Someone was actively trying to manipulate events around her. She smiled, not in fear, but in quiet satisfaction. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning. Every suspicious detail, every unusual encounter, every subtle anomaly was now part of a larger picture. She could see the outline of the officer's plan, and she was already several steps ahead. Her calm exterior was her shield, hiding the storm of analysis and strategy that was brewing inside. Meanwhile, at the police department, the officers were growing increasingly frustrated. Their attempts to manipulate the situation had not gone as planned. They had expected to catch her off guard, to see her falter, to appear guilty in the eyes of others. Instead, every attempt was met with quiet observation and subtle resistance. They whispered among themselves, questioning why their plan seemed so ineffective. What they did not realize was that they were being observed, documented, and analyzed at every turn. Every move they made was becoming part of a record that could not be disputed. She leaned back in her chair and thought through the scenario carefully. Acting too soon could be dangerous. She needed the right moment, a moment when the evidence of their misconduct could be irrefutably exposed. Patience was as critical as awareness, and she had both in abundance. Her entire career had been built on analyzing threats, understanding patterns, and using intelligence to neutralize danger. This situation was no different. She moved methodically, quietly preparing for the confrontation that was inevitable, but on her terms. The officers decided to escalate their efforts. They believed that subtlety had failed, so they planned a more direct approach. They discussed how they would confront her, how they would manipulate witnesses, and how they would present fabricated evidence. They were still unaware that she had anticipated multiple scenarios and had prepared a response for each. Her experience in intelligence and security had taught her that arrogance was a dangerous weakness, and these officers had it in abundance. Their lack of awareness of her capabilities made their plan fragile, and she was ready to exploit that fragility when the time was right. She received a call from an official in a nearby federal office. The conversation was brief and professional, but it confirmed her growing understanding of the situation. She was not alone in her awareness, and her network of colleagues could provide support if necessary. The officers, by contrast, were operating in isolation, relying only on their assumptions and misjudgments. Their ignorance was her advantage, and she planned to use it fully. Every subtle act of observation she had made was now turning into strategic leverage, and she understood that timing would be crucial in exposing the truth. Her evening continued with quiet preparation. She reviewed footage from cameras around her office, noting suspicious behavior and recording interactions that were out of the ordinary. She traced communication patterns and began building a digital timeline of events. Each detail added clarity, each anomaly revealed intent, and each observation strengthened her position. The officers' plan, which had seemed simple and foolproof to them, was unraveling in ways they could not perceive. She remained outwardly calm as if the day had been ordinary, but her mind was fully engaged in a complex game of strategy and observation. Outside, the officers were becoming increasingly nervous. Their confidence had begun to erode as small inconsistencies emerged in their plan. They noticed that she seemed unfazed by their movements, that she continued her routine with confidence and poise. They whispered among themselves, unsure of how to proceed. Their attempts at manipulation and intimidation were ineffective. They were realizing, though too late, that the person they sought to frame was not someone who could be easily controlled. She had anticipated their arrogance and had quietly turned their own actions into evidence against them. She thought carefully about her next move. Public confrontation was unnecessary at this stage. What she needed was documentation, clarity, and confirmation of the officer's intentions. She compiled the information she had gathered into a clear, detailed record. Every suspicious vehicle, every unusual interaction, every fabricated claim was noted. Her plan was to let the officers continue just long enough for the evidence to be undeniable, to ensure that when accountability came, there could be no argument, no doubt, and no escape. Her patience was her power, and she wielded it with precision. Her colleagues began to notice subtle changes in the environment around her. Security personnel reported unusual activity, neighbors mentioned vehicles and faces they had not seen before, and routine interactions seemed slightly off. She remained outwardly unaffected, but internally, she cataloged every detail. Her understanding of strategy, human behavior, and threat management allowed her to maintain calm while preparing to take decisive action when the moment arrived. The officers, meanwhile, were still blind to the reality that their plan was crumbling. Their misjudgment of her abilities was their fatal flaw. As night fell, she reflected on the events of the day. Every small observation, every subtle anomaly had contributed to a larger understanding of the situation. She had not only identified the threat, but had positioned herself to ensure that justice could be delivered without compromise. Her composure, intelligence, and patience were her greatest assets. She understood that the officer's arrogance had created opportunities that could now be used to ensure accountability. She remained calm, confident that the truth would emerge in a way that left no room for doubt. In the final hours of the evening, she continued her preparations. She reviewed all collected evidence, ensuring that each detail was accurately documented and securely stored. She anticipated questions, considered responses, and mapped out the sequence of events that would expose the officer's misconduct. Her planning was meticulous. Every contingency had been considered, every possibility weighed. She knew that when the time came, she would act decisively, not out of anger, but from a place of calm authority and strategic clarity. By the time she left her office, the situation had been fully analyzed, and her plan was set into motion. She walked through the empty streets with confidence, aware that the night brought both quiet and opportunity. She remained alert, observing the environment with the same precision that had guided her throughout the day. Every step, every glance, every movement was intentional. She understood the stakes, and she was fully prepared to ensure that the truth would prevail. The officers, unaware of her awareness and preparation, continued their attempts to manipulate the situation. Their actions, though intended to control her, were now being quietly recorded and analyzed. Each attempt at intimidation, each misjudged move, each moment of overconfidence was becoming evidence against them. They were trapped in a situation they did not fully understand, dealing with someone whose intelligence and strategic thinking far exceeded their expectations. The more they acted, the more they revealed, and the more secure her position became. As she reached her apartment that night, she allowed herself a moment of calm reflection. The day had been tense, filled with subtle threats and quiet observation. Yet she had remained composed, collected, and in control. Her ability to navigate complex situations, to observe without revealing awareness, and to prepare for decisive action had turned the officer's plan into a tool for accountability. She was not just surviving the situation, she was mastering it. She understood that the next phase would require careful execution, but she was ready. She settled in for the night, reviewing final notes and ensuring that every detail had been recorded accurately. Her mind remained sharp, analyzing scenarios and planning for what would come next. She knew that the officer's plan was built on arrogance and assumption, and those assumptions would now be used against them. Her patience, intelligence, and composure had created a clear advantage, one that could not be ignored. As she prepared for sleep, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The truth was on her side, and the day had proven that careful observation and strategic thinking could over. The morning broke with a soft golden light, but she felt none of the ordinary calm that usually accompanied sunrise. Today everything would change. Overnight, she had reviewed every detail she had gathered the previous day. The suspicious vehicles, the strange behaviors, the subtle manipulations of those officers. Their plan to frame her was clear, and she now had all the information she needed to take control. She knew exactly how to turn the tables, and her calm, measured mind prepared her for the moment of confrontation. This would not be a battle of brute force or anger, but a demonstration of authority, intelligence, and strategic foresight. She arrived at her office building just like any other day, greeting the security personnel and colleagues with her usual warmth. Her steps were steady, her demeanor unshakable, but inside, every observation she had made was being brought together like pieces of a puzzle. She knew where each officer would be, how they would act and what they expected to happen. They believed they had control, but in reality, they were walking into a carefully orchestrated situation in which every action they took would reveal their own misjudgments. Her patience and planning had created the perfect moment to expose the truth. As she moved through the building, she noticed the first signs of their nervousness. Subtle shifts in posture, quick glances, and the tension in their voices revealed that something was already off. She allowed a slight, knowing smile to cross her face. They had not expected her to notice so much, and they were beginning to realize that the target they thought was vulnerable was, in fact, far more aware, prepared, and capable than they could imagine. Her calmness only added to their confusion. They were unsure whether she had already discovered their actions, or if she was simply confident in her daily routine. The officers approached her under the pretense of questioning her about a routine matter. They spoke with authority, believing that their position and uniform would intimidate her into compliance. But she remained poised, her voice steady and polite, her expressions calm. Every word they spoke, every suggestion they made, every insinuation they attempted, was carefully documented in her mind. She asked simple, neutral questions in return, subtly guiding the conversation to reveal their intentions without letting them know that she already understood. Her composure disarmed them, and they began to show signs of uncertainty for the first time. She excused herself briefly, moving to a private area where she could make a few discreet phone calls. She contacted trusted colleagues within the federal network, explaining the situation in careful detail. Her ability to communicate clearly, calmly, and strategically ensured that reinforcements and oversight could be brought in without alerting the officers. Every step she took was calculated, designed to maintain control and ensure that when the confrontation escalated, it would do so on her terms. Her experience as Director of Homeland Security had taught her the importance of timing, coordination, and clarity in high-stakes situations. When she returned, the officers were clearly agitated. Their attempts at subtle manipulation and intimidation were failing, and they could sense it. Their questions became sharper, their tone more forceful, but she remained unshaken. She spoke calmly, using measured language that communicated authority without aggression. Every answer she gave revealed her awareness. Every question she asked highlighted their inconsistencies. Gradually, the balance of power shifted. The officers, who had once believed themselves in control, were now subtly being exposed by their own actions. She decided it was time for the reveal. With a steady voice, she disclosed her true position. She explained calmly but firmly that she was the Director of Homeland Security. The room fell silent. The officers froze, their expressions a mix of shock, disbelief, and fear. They had assumed they were dealing with an ordinary citizen, someone without influence or power. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate her completely. Now they faced the reality of her authority, and the realization struck them with full force. Her next step was methodical. She presented the evidence she had gathered, documented interactions, suspicious vehicles, patterns of behavior, and inconsistencies in their statements. She explained how each piece of information had been recorded, analyzed, and preserved. She demonstrated that their attempts at framing her were not only obvious to her, but also entirely reversible and legally actionable. Every officer in the room began to understand the severity of their miscalculation. The casual confidence that had carried them through their planning dissolved, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Despite the tension, she remained composed. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with the panic of the officers. She spoke not with anger but with clarity, outlining the consequences of their actions in a way that left no room for dispute. Her authority was undeniable, not because of intimidation or force, but because of her preparation, intelligence, and meticulous attention to detail. She showed them that their plan, which had seemed clever and foolproof to them, was fundamentally flawed from the start. Every assumption they had made about her vulnerability had been proven false. The officers attempted to explain themselves, to justify their actions, but her responses were calm and unyielding. She highlighted the evidence they had unwittingly provided through their own behavior, showing how their plan had been documented and preserved from the very beginning. She emphasized that accountability was not optional, and that the misuse of authority carried consequences. Slowly, their excuses and rationalizations fell apart. What had begun as a confident scheme to frame her had become a clear demonstration of their own misconduct. Throughout the confrontation, she maintained control over the narrative. She guided the discussion, asking precise questions and allowing the officers to reveal more of their intentions than they realized. Every answer, every hesitation, and every contradiction was used to build a comprehensive picture of their actions. She did not raise her voice, she did not threaten, and she did not panic. Her authority was rooted in preparation, knowledge, and calm execution. By the end of the conversation, the officers were no longer in control. They were completely exposed. Once the evidence and details were fully presented, she outlined the next steps. She explained that internal investigations would follow, that their misconduct would be formally documented, and that accountability would be enforced according to law and policy. She emphasized that justice was not personal but procedural, ensuring that the consequences were fair and inevitable. The officers, who had started the day believing they could manipulate and intimidate her, now faced the certainty of oversight, investigation, and repercussions. The roles had been reversed completely, and she had done so without ever losing her composure. After the confrontation, she took a moment to reflect quietly. Her preparation and awareness had prevented what could have been a dangerous escalation. By remaining calm and strategic, she had not only protected herself but had ensured that the corrupt officers would face consequences for their actions. The situation had demonstrated the power of intelligence, patience, and careful observation. She understood that authority was most effective when combined with strategy and restraint. And today, she had applied both to perfection. She reached out to her federal colleagues once more, providing updates and confirming that the officers' actions were being formally addressed. Her communication was precise and professional, ensuring that all necessary steps were taken to maintain accountability while avoiding unnecessary escalation. Every detail she had observed, every inconsistency she had noted, and every subtle act of misconduct was now part of a documented record. Her calm demeanor had allowed her to turn what could have been a dangerous situation into a controlled, procedural resolution. As the day continued, news of the officers' exposure began to ripple quietly through the department. Their colleagues, who had once assumed the officers' confidence meant competence, now began to understand the gravity of their errors. The ripple of accountability spread outward, ensuring that the lesson of the day would be remembered. The woman, for her part, continued her work, maintaining her calm professionalism while overseeing the proper documentation and resolution of the situation. She had turned a potential threat into a demonstration of authority, intelligence, and integrity. By evening, the immediate threat had been neutralized. The officers were formally removed from the situation, and investigations had been initiated. She returned to her office, taking a moment to breathe and reflect. Her patience, strategy, and calm composure had turned an attempt at intimidation into an undeniable demonstration of her authority. She had navigated a situation filled with potential danger without losing control, showing that preparation and intelligence were far more powerful than arrogance and assumption. As night fell, she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. The day had tested her in ways that few could understand, but she had emerged not only unscathed but in full control. Her calm observation, strategic thinking, and clear authority had ensured that justice would be served, and that those who attempted to misuse power would face the consequences of their actions. The evening passed quietly, but the events of the day would leave a lasting impact on those who had witnessed or attempted the framing. The lesson was clear.